Okay, wow, you know, that is all that I can say. Pedro and Tsepo. This has been an absolute treat for us over the past 2 days. And I can sense a great excitement about the project and program that's on the table, of course, as a collective and co-creative effort. We're going to spend the last 45 minutes just on kind of what now, what do we do with this? The idea of a Critical Mandela Studies Programme seems to be a kind of consensus that has emerged right throughout this particular kind of discussion. You have critical inquiry and also a kind of architecture or mechanism that can house this particular format that we hear people are engaging with in the various discussions that we had. But we don't want to close that down with closing remarks simply from the three organizing organizations or institutions, but just for the first part of this discussion, give 20 minutes to the floor and the participants to just share with us what do you think this particular program and project should look like. Taking it further, no keynotes from the floor, people. We have had, or from here, we have had great discussions, which of course established and justified our consensus around a Mandela Studies program. But what would you suggest and propose? What would your ideas be in how we should take this particular program forward? Okay. Right, so this is open to anybody who would like to speak. Iron is there. We are not going to go back, because you didn't have a chance to speak in the previous session.
Can I kick off, Chair?
Yes, please.
So, Chair, I'm also grateful to have been a part of this very important conversation. It's been a very special privilege, and I want to express appreciation to you for that. And so, just one main point I'd like to offer. It seems to me that we could learn well from I guess let's use the term Mexican mythology, which reminds us that below the river runs another river. And below that river runs many, many rivers. What's my point? When Africans left Africa 60 to 80,000 years ago, we didn't leave with our DNA only. We left with culture. The point that I'm making is that 60,000-year history since then is a history of connections and of struggles over civilization and between quote-unquote civilizations. That period is stitched together in its complexity and contradiction. It is stitched together these quote-unquote histories. And so I would discourage us from having a view that history begins 6,000 years ago. Obviously, I would discourage us from having a view that history began in the 11th century in England, when we know England itself is the product of thousands of years of history. So, what I want to encourage us as we continue this work is to be sensitive and careful that we not easily default to what Ali Mazrui would call Eurocentrism with an African face. And that we'd rather default to Edward Said's idea of synthesis a mutual, what I call a mutual struggle. Call it differently. I call it a unity and struggle of knowledges that sees us, quote unquote, go into those archives to be able to see how these have been stitched together. Badly stitched together, well stitched together. And so I just want to encourage us, therefore, as we continue this journey, both on decolonization and the journey here in respect of critical Mandela studies, that we open ourselves as we go into that archive, or the archives, as we have learned, the archives are being stitched together themselves in very complex and difficult manners, that we open ourselves to the possibility that comes when we engage in the unity and struggle of knowledges, rather than allow ourselves, because of our experiences over the last sweep of 100 years, to default to nativism and to Eurocentrism with an African face. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Please go ahead.
Prof. I feel very bad that I was not part of this conversation from the onset. I had to use guerrilla tactics to just come and be part of this and sabotage a few people, but I'm happy that I've been part of it. I like what Professor Mangu has been saying in the past 5 years. And I remember the first time I heard his idea of understanding Mandela not as a person alone, a standalone, but as part of a constellation now of other Mandelic kind of, good leaders in his time and before. And I think also Prof. Andre Odendaal wrote a book about the founders who talks about 60-year period before 1912 of African intellectual scholarly work and efforts. And in that, I would also maybe want to understand Mandela as what Mandela as a leader, as what Ache Mafeje would understand leadership from comparing two villages in Engcobo. And he says that a leader, to some extent, must share some values with the subjects or the subordinates that he would be basically leading as a superordinate. And that validates his leadership and him being a leader, and not just an imposed, good, iconic person over and against the will of the people. So I think in taking the conversation forward, we would truly err if we take Mandela out of that context. And then it means that we have to understand Mandela. As we validate and appreciate and honor him, we must also validate and appreciate the people whose values he embodies, according to Mafeje's understanding of what a leader is called. Thank you.
Glenn?
Morning, everyone. I'm going to turn around so I can all face you. I've really enjoyed being part of this. Gosh, I hope that's not a prelude to my remarks. Because in fact, it's quite the opposite. I've really been struck by what we've been talking about by trying to synthesize what Mandela is. And I think what's been absent from this conversation for me is what I'd like to refer to as the metaphysical Mandela, or the quantum Mandela. You know, there's a phenomenon out there in spiritual teachings, perhaps, which regards some phenomenon called the Mandela effect. And I don't know if many of you are aware of the Mandela effect. If you're not, go and do some research on YouTube. And the Mandela effect, actually, it's a social phenomenon whereby people misremember certain things, and there are debates about whether it's an actual misremembering or whether people are actually on parallel timelines in our lives, and we've got different things happening on those parallel timelines. And that on certain timelines, Mandela actually died in prison, and people have a distinct memory of the fact that Mandela died and we saw his funeral on TV. And there are more than one persons, which makes the phenomenon noteworthy. There are other folks, again, obviously, who say, no, I've seen Mandela died in 2013. Me, myself, I've walked past his corpse as part of the procession when he was lying in state. So that's the timeline I seem to be on. But the metaphysical Mandela goes beyond just whether we are perceiving different Mandelas for ourselves, but also to the point that Mandela, as the collective inheritance which we've come together, is quite controversial because some people perceive him as the revolutionary, the militant, the peacemaker, or whatever it might be. Coming back to my point about the metaphysical, I think we've not spoken a lot about the vocation of Mandela and how Mandela also influences vocation. I particularly strongly feel that I've been called to be a follower of Mandela, to embody him, and that it's by no coincidence that I end up at an institution like Nelson Mandela University, and is that my Mandela effect in my timeline? So those sorts of metaphysical questions, I think, if you want to speak about Mandela in a university, the university has to start embracing these sort of big philosophical, spiritual questions also, which seems to have been absent from the conversation for me. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Glenn. Chair, please go ahead. Latisi? Oh, sorry.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And just to start by, again, thanking all of you for participating and for contributing to this immensely transformative discussion, in a sense. You know, it wasn't just about the topic. It also, our subjectivities were sort of involved in it. And it's wonderful to come to a space now where we can think about next steps, because it also feels like this huge elephant that we have to chip away at, but that there are opportunities for doing something. So from sitting and wearing my cap as the head of council, as the chair of council, I think we've been talking to the converted in this room. Particularly from the university side. And for me, I think what would be very, perhaps next step-ish, would be to actually widen discussion, the same conversation, within a broader university community, so that they can also perhaps, it will not happen as the same way that it's happened now, but I think we all have to go through that intellectual and emotional experience that we've gone through because we've been here. So, I'll leave that to the university administration to sort out how they will do that. But just to say again, you know, Mandela is one of those people who we all identify. We kind of identify with this person, this icon, this idea that we ourselves would like to be. But we don't know whether we can do it. You know, it's like going to a doctor and coming out and saying, oh, he had a nice bedside manner, you know. But you don't know what it is, and you don't know if you can be like that, or you have a good service when you go to a local council or one of the government departments. And you know what good service is, but you don't know how to give it yourself. So I think we will struggle with that from a personalist political kind of perspective. But really, I think for the university, the support from the council will be full 100%. I've heard the comments about how we don't strangle this thing by making it into a bureaucratic, too heavily governance, too controlled kind of thing. It sounds as if the archive is something that is alive, that is organic. You know, it's not a static thing. It's not a localized issue. The archive, it sounds like it's a living, growing, evolving, you know, process. And And from that perspective, you've really challenged us today by telling us we don't know our history, and that is so truthful. So it sounds like we also have to speak the truth, you know, and not really fool ourselves about what we know and what we don't know, and how we are going to do this. It is going to be very hard at this university to do that, but we're going to give it our best. And thank you very much for all your support from the other institutions, from partners, and Dalibhunga has left. She's no longer here because she's dealing with her. But I think we have a good leader. I think we have a Mandela-type leader in this organization. And I think for that reason, it will happen. Whatever it is we say will happen.
Sure. I just want to make a specific suggestion. A program on biography and leadership, it seems to me, could be one way of entering into this history. Somebody corrected me after, Tsep corrected me that, you know, actually there are discussions on social media about some of the people I was talking about, the Mkais and all of that. Well, I think the real challenge is how to take that from social media and actually institutionalize it within a university so that we create a center where this kind of work actually takes place within a university, where people can come and do master's theses and PhD theses on a whole variety of these individuals. That's one kind of specific suggestion I want to make. The second one is being part of the broader community. I used to run something called the Steve Biko Foundation many years ago. And we were quite successful in getting young people into a relationship with the University of Fort Hare at the time. And it worked very, very nicely. Because I think that we need to convene a space for young people and scholars to be in interaction with each other. And finally, I mean, I have seen, and I have a bias in this, I have seen something called the W.E.B. Du Bois Institute at Harvard, which does just remarkable work on African-American history. I mean, there's no institution that does it quite like they do. Now, obviously, they've got a lot of money, but they do the kind of historiographic, biographical research that we could do. There is no place that I know of in South Africa that does this kind of work on a systematic basis. So it might be an opportunity.
I'm aware that there's an incredible long-term agenda, and I think the comparison with the Du Bois Institute's a very good one. But there's a short-term agenda that I'm curious how comfortable you are in confronting. Because Pedro put forward a very sharp and specific question. He said, you know, was the moral authority of Mandela used to make that shift from RDP to GEAR happen? And we began to get a very complex argument from Joel. So is there is a worry for anyone who wants to bear the name of Nelson Mandela that the arguments are going to not reflect well, right? And it's going to take a lot of courage to have those debates and discussions, to commission, because sometimes the research isn't there, and some of these are burning issues. They can't be done on the turn. You know, if that's the nub of one of the questions, then is that a seminar that's scheduled 2 years down the line, and the research is scheduled so that it can be done in a really informed and serious way? These are hot debates, and that, you know, they have to be negotiated and the ground prepared politically so that they can happen in their fullest complexity. So I think the challenge for you is enormous. To shy away from the issues is your only real danger.
Thanks, Carolyn. Michael? And if we can keep this particular kind of template now of suggestions, that would be great, okay?
Okay, thanks. There's an obvious constitutional bias in the question I want to pose, but it is, how do we locate this moment, a colloquium on the meaning of Mandela, within the larger project of realizing fully the socio-economic rights of all who live in South Africa?
Okay, the format of suggestions and way forwards, please. Thank you.
Thank you for this. Maybe I'll stand. Coming from the sciences, one of the things that sort of strikes me with perhaps not quite clear on how the social sciences do this, but certainly on our end, if for instance we have honors students and there's a particular topic of interest that we'd like them to pursue, they could essentially develop a title or even hypotheses that they would go out and test and therefore write that up in a particular report. So I'm wondering if perhaps some of the academics within the social sciences, if that is sort of the direction they tend to pursue in following some of these issues, the challenges that have been brought forward in the previous session in terms of the historical context and information that has not been captured would be one sort of vehicle with which to try and seek out truths in this aspect. One of the things also I wanted to point out is that in African folklore, oral tradition is the sort of the bedrock of how history has been disseminated through time. And I've yet to hear, or perhaps maybe it was shared, I was just not there, that that aspect of information should not be discounted. And that's perhaps one of the areas that perhaps we tend to lean towards the written word, which is all good and well. But in our African culture, oral history has been the bedrock of how information was disseminated. And unfortunately, obviously, with modernity, certain things have been lost and information has not necessarily been well captured. And perhaps these are some of the areas that we would need to follow on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't have yet a very clear sense of the relationship between the Mandela Project and the project of decolonization. Because we heard Mandela as a modern subject, as a Victorian subject, and so on. So for me, the project of decolonization is an anti-elitist project. And I want to draw particularly on the views of the philosopher Jacques Rancière, whose main work lies in articulating the intellectual work of industry workers in the 19th century France. And that wasn't a kind of a critique of the dominant Marxist view of an elite that knows what others think, what the workers think, what the working class think, and the intellectuals that think they can articulate the views of the workers. And what Rancière is saying is that we need to work with the notion of radical equality, where equality is not something we strive towards, but something we start with. So we start with the notion that there's intellectual equality. Students don't know less than lecturers. The workers don't know less than the intellectuals and so on. So we need to start with that as a principle in order to gain momentum to a project of decoloniality.
Thank you. And we were taking two last sections, that it was like the strange thing about closing.
Yes. So I've been struck by all the the panels that have been. Yeah, so that, but also that yesterday I referred to Eve Tuck's work on what decolonization is not a metaphor, but as a project that seeks to repatriate land and human dignity. But also building on that, the notion that violence on the land, through the land, is also violence on the body, particularly women's bodies. From that perspective, I'm wondering, with the Vice Chancellor's announcement on the first day about the establishment of the Gender and Women's Studies Programme at Nelson Mandela University, I'm not wondering, I'm asking you guys whether you will be thinking seriously about transdisciplinarity and about working with the gender and women's studies in conceptualizing and indeed implementing the program.
I think we're at a very interesting moment here where all the suggestions coming, the discussions that we've had, the enormous potential of what Mandela studies could mean. But this has got to work inside of a very specific university that has renamed itself. And we need a greater sense of that university beyond the facts and figures that we've been given. Because, you know, I know my university and its history. I know the university on higher ground in Cape Town where I studied and its history. I know Stellenbosch and its history. For me, the old UPE Metropolitan Mandela University is something that we've got to get to grips with as a university in the Eastern Cape. And how, and in relation to the big question of what is the work of a university in the Eastern Cape? And what is the work of a university in South Africa? Bearing in mind that the Eastern Cape is deemed to be conventionally the province of development. This is the province of poverty relief and development. So when chairs get created at Fort Hare, and they usually framed as poverty and development, that the humanities is deemed to be a kind of a luxury in the Eastern Cape. That might be what you do in Johannesburg and maybe in Cape Town, but not in the Eastern Cape. And so you also see all kinds of shifts happening at a place like Rhodes, where Makanda, formerly called Grahamstown, has lost its apartheid privileges as a city. And that has all kinds of impact on the university. Now there's an opportunity here, because a Mandela Studies program primarily has to be a program in the humanities. And that has got to be a commitment of the university to resourcing the humanities in the name of Mandela, in which this is not a Mandela program of the party, it is not a Mandela program of the family, but it's a Mandela program framed around ethical questions, social questions, and questions of history. Now, there are all sorts of powerful suggestions that have come up there. This is work that's got to be located inside of an intellectual history of the Eastern Cape and South Africa. That's very clear, right? It's historical work, it's biographical work, it's intellectual history, it's cultural history. And that can, as we know, as Kolela has told us, we actually know very little. And there is much work to do. And so the project has got to be defended from the bureaucrats and from the political officials who are going to try to say that this is going to be a program in Mandela's name about social delivery, about development and uplift of the people, about teaching the people the values of health and welfare and so forth, that it becomes almost like native affairs all over again, and governing people in a certain way. And so it's a revolutionary program. But, you know, and ultimately it's got to be about what universities do. And what do? We do throughputs and outputs. We do resourcing. We do doctoral students, master's students, honors students, and it's got to be put through a program of research and of the formulation of something so potentially interesting. I mean, I was talking over coffee with a young colleague at this university who is a music educator and a performer. This is a place that has music studies. You've got to build on what you have, but to frame it along the lines of the humanities. And we all have an interest in this. And this is a project that we all will support.
Okay, so I'm not sure that I'm going to have another chance to say this, but I just want to say a really big thank you to my colleagues for opening up this space and for allowing us to partner in this initiative over the last year. And to say to you that we made a lot of decisions in coming to think about how this format of this thing should work. And we arrived at the conclusion that we didn't want this to be a mass meeting, right? That we wanted this particular iteration of the discussion to be a space in which we could slow down and have engagements with each other that would allow arguments to emerge, to develop, and in a sense to settle. And I think we've achieved that. And I'd like to say a really big thank you to Andre and to Vern, and to say that in this, in some ways, you're foreshadowing what this program could and should be all about. I mean, you're entering into a kind of space here of thinking how experimentally the university, and it's the question that Siraj is raising, this university, and a number of colleagues have raised it, this university addresses this big question of how the modern university is going to be doing something which is fundamentally different, right? How is the modern university not going to be this vehicle for social mobility for some of us? Or if it's going to be the vehicle for social mobility for some of us, how do we do it in a way which doesn't give my child that sense of entitlement that my father went there, so therefore I must go there, and therefore my children will go there. And you set up this whole line of a particular form of elitism which is only social. Which is only social. So what we've been talking about here is this difficulty of how you work with this elitism which is pro-social. How you work with this idea that this place can be a specialist place. A place which is very distinct and different in what it does, and does it in a way which is going to be open to talent and ability wherever that talent and ability might come from. I mean, how do you do that? We've been talking about that. And I'd like to say then, in relation to that, Andre, that it's hell of a difficult. Almost all of the institutions that I know that have tried to open themselves up beyond existing social elites' captures or capturing of these institutions have struggled and have failed. I mean, I cannot think of a single model in the world where it has been able to reproduce its almost critique of itself. And its critique of itself in such a way that it is able to decanonize itself. Let me put another word in your place. Not decolonization, decanonization. Where it can decanonize itself repeatedly. You know? And so all of those examples that we have are a real test to us here, because we're going to have to be experimental here, and this is the pragmatics of it, Andre. We're going to have to be experimental, but not so experimental that you shoot yourself in the foot. Right? Not so experimental that you're going to kind of think that you're a flat democracy here, where anybody can just walk in and his or her opinion is going to be equal to the opinion of somebody who has thought about things quite hard. Right? I'm being deliberately provocative here. Right? So how do you keep, if you like, this place from becoming a kind of space of populism in which any way of thinking about what might happen is going to be permitted. So you've got to deal pragmatically with that tension. And what I really would now like to suggest is that we do exactly what Carolyn is suggesting, is to set an agenda. I mean, that would be, I think, the really important thing to do. And then to work out, without being prejudicial about this, what format is going to best help in the realization of meeting this agenda. What's the format? And it could be anything, you know. And so we have to start on a principled basis here. And that principled basis is thinking about this old and enduring thing about what a university is, that a university is not scared of controversy. That a university is not ever going to be afraid of dealing with the difficult questions. That a university is never going to be dogmatic. You know, the minute that dogma, the line, is what comes to run a particular university or institution, that is no longer a university. So how do you keep open that hospitality to the strange, the hospitality to, and I love the way in which Lebo came and spoke to us about the other side of the line, the ancestors on the other side, and how we engage with all of that. So I think, Andre, the crucial short-term task here is setting an intellectual agenda. And taking time then in thinking about how you're able to sustain this thing in a way which is pragmatic, you know, which is able to deal with all of these current challenges of accountability, the neoliberal university. You're not going to be able to run away from those things. I mean, you cannot abolish and declare that those things don't matter. You know, so you've got to find a way of living inside of all of that in a way in which your objectives and your principles are what keep your conscience clean. And so, you know, Petronella was beginning to talk about that the other day. So it's a really difficult step that we are all going to be taking here. And I say we because all of us have stakes in this here, Andre. You know, we all have stakes in it because we have a number, I want to say this in the last thing that I say, a number of other incredible innovations that are taking place in the higher education system, right now. In the midst of all of our challenges, there are incredible innovations at a multiplicity of institutions. Here comes another one, and how do we ensure that this innovation is going to be able to not only survive, so, it mustn't become another specialist institution for which I have bragging rights, and I say I'm an affiliate, I don't want bragging rights like that, How do we turn it into an institution that is going to have these effects that will shift the nature of our conversation about the nature of the university in this time and place in which we find ourselves?
I think our Chief Executive, Siluhatang, should respond institutionally, but from us, before handing the mic to him, from my perspective, maybe just one point, and I'd like to take us back to that very hot topic of archives, is that a studies program like this is going to confront enormous difficulty in terms of access to information. Unlocking archive. And we can talk a lot about the specifics of archival challenges in South Africa right now. But I think we as an institution, the foundation, can be a strong support there. Now, we've been warned by Carolyn, by Siraj, is that you don't want a sort of an authorized stamp, a gatekeeping role, but the foundation also has a strong commitment to what I would call a form of banditry in the archive. Madiba's birth name of Kholihlahla, troubling. And I'll just give you 3 quick examples. One is the debate around, did Madiba compromise too much? Did he sell out in the 90s? We really need to listen to those national intelligence recordings of every conversation he had between about 1985 and 1990. We know they exist. We've been trying for years to access them. Neil Barnard, the head of national intelligence, published a memoir recently in which he quotes Madiba endlessly. You look at the footnotes and you realize he's actually quoting from transcripts of those conversations Madiba was having in prison with other members of ANC leadership, with fellow prisoners and so on. We talked to Neil Barnard and he says, no, I used to have access to them when I first started research on the book, but I don't have access to them anymore. It's going to take some banditry to get access to that kind of record. Another example, and I'm looking at Joel here, is that for this book project, despite our positionality, we really struggled to access Madiba's presidential records. And we had to use some banditry in order to get in underneath the structures of power. But it's a worry for us, is that to this day we didn't get access to the full presidential record. And we don't know if it's because some of it is missing or some of it is still being hidden, even from an institution like the foundation. And then a last example, coming back to you, Kolela, is this question of the Stengel role in Long Walk to Freedom. Is for years we've been trying to unravel all of it. Why did Madiba choose a white American to co-write that book? And well, it's a long story, but I can tell you just a few highlights. Is that actually Madiba chose Ezekiel Mpahlele. And he wrote the first 6 chapters. It's taken us years to find out where those chapters are. That manuscript, it's actually... No, is it? Have you seen it?
Yeah, Oxford. In Anthony Sampson's collection.
Okay, well, I've seen a copy in New York in Rick Stengel's collection.
He had them, yeah.
Yeah. So, but the bottom line is that Madiba found that collaboration unsatisfactory. And then decided, okay, I need to work with someone else. And he chose Nadine Gordimer. But Nadine Gordimer was interested, but actually wanted her name on the front cover. It needed to be Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Mandela and Nadine Gordimer. And then Madiba, and our research still hasn't revealed who all these names. There were 3 other South Africans. I know Zakes Dar was one of them, that Madiba then proposed to the publisher, Little Brown. And those 3 were all rejected by the publisher, and that's the point at which Madiba said, okay, well, you suggest somebody. And it was Rick Stengel. Long story, but it shows how the archive is this endless search and maneuvering and arguably banditry in order to get to where one is trying to get to. And that's where I think the foundation can be of help to the university. I'll pass over to our chief executive.
Cello will make a few remarks at the end, Cello, and that will just come after my thanks as well, so just hang on for that as well. I'm not obliged to respond to all the questions raised here, but I had a discussion with the VC as well just before she left, so, and I know also with our chair here, there's a very, very strong commitment, at least in a broad frame as to what I can share here with the team here. The one would be that, of course, the whole idea of a Critical Mandela Studies Programme is precisely to have the debates around, say, for instance, GEAR and the RDP on the table and how those kinds of things took shape historically. But apart from that, also, at the kind of, in modern times, this discursive construction around various images and iconisms of Mandela as well. That's the one. The second one is that, Siraj, you're right, and in fact, you align with Colella there very well. The question about how the Mandela Studies Programme must reframe the question of what the university is for, or what the university is, has been raised in the VC in her address on Wednesday. Exactly making that particular kind of connection, that is what the Mandela Programme, one of the questions of the Mandela Studies Programme should be that. She also made in that same address another question that you raised, and that the Mandela Studies Programme, Shiraz, also has to contribute to the renewal of the humanities. Meaning that in the framing already within the way that she put forward the proposition is that the Mandela Studies Programme would be a strong program that links to the humanities in different kinds of ways. It's a very interesting thing, and that is that our university has, and Council has acknowledged that, has invested in the, I'm sorry for this word, the natural sciences for a long period of time, and they have taken a deliberate decision to invest a sufficient number of energy, intellectual resources, and also financial resources in the rethinking and the renewal of the humanities. And this particular idea of the Mandela Studies Programme will slot under that as well. That has been a key theme coming through, and the same one on the connection between the Mandela Studies Programme and the Center for Gender and Women's Studies as well, within the university space labor, that ties in one of the thematic areas in the inaugural around transdisciplinarity in that space. But of course, as Crane would say, this is going to be a very difficult project. And we will have to find ways to give it a pragmatic but still a flexible expression so that it evolves in the way in which our thought processes and our strategies are taking shape. We have also put together now a team that works on the history of the university itself. Actually, the inception workshop will happen somewhere in April, bringing together a couple of scholars that looks at this particular history of our university in the context of the intellectual spaces in the Eastern Cape, with the understanding that that kind of self-clarification and interpretive scheme will provide another platform for taking that forward. So Crane, yes, both from the side of our partnership, it has been fantastic working with the two of you and of course your host institutions. So thanks for us on that. And we would more or less keep this an experimental space in different kinds of ways. We have had people that will knock together a report for us with the key thematic areas coming through. I've been, I feel like I've been spoiled, let me put it that way, when it comes to the intellectual project on the table and the fact that one can have time, to come together like this as friends, to engage with a very, very, very crucial topic. The ideas that came through in the first panel, fascinating stuff. And I do think that the younger generation will have a key role to play in the shaping of this new program around a series of different questions that we would like to put on the table. But what I found very interesting is both the subject matter, but also the modes of thought and the modes of analysis that has been presented and the forms of argumentation has been absolutely fantastic. We also, in this space, when we tried to make the distinction between the Mandela persona and Mandela as a set of ideas, or what the VC would refer to, Mandela in italics, that is the layered, contextualized Mandela that is in conversation with all the other different sets of voices that constructed the conditions for a certain kind of history to emerge. I also thought that the program yesterday has been of particular value for the university's own program on historiography, the role of biography as critical inquiry, and of course the key questions raised there. And this morning, of those who have been here, the archive as an idea has taken on so many productive dimensions, and I'm not going to go through what my own thought patterns are in that regard, but I am just so grateful that we have had this particular set of discussions that have complexified and layered the massive challenge ahead of us in ways that gives us both a sense of its enormity, but also a sense of hope and the possibilities that may emerge from that. So let me then, as I close down, and I always get some of this stuff wrong, I've done that earlier in the program as well. The one is that the thank you notes. I'm not gonna talk and say anything about Kolela's sense of technology. I try to. I tried to Skype with him in Washington, and I had to email him to say, press the green button to answer. That's how bad it was. Eh? The one would be that you could see, for those of you who have attended last night, that the entire university have mobilized around the idea of Dalibhunga in such a great way. And this is why we're also hosting it here in the art gallery. And you will have to make time within the next, when we break in 5 minutes, you will have to make time to go down and see the exhibition that the visual arts department knocked together. It's called We Are Here, in relation to the Mandela name chains. Okay, so the department was given a task to frame a form of expression that's tied into their discipline as to what this name change may mean. That will be important for this gathering to go there. So we're grateful for those. Our chairperson of council, our VC, as you can see, has been here for extended periods. In fact, the chairperson has been here for the entire colloquium, so thanks for that, Chair. It's absolutely great having you here. We have had deans here. We have had DVCs here. the co-travelers, the NMF team in its entirety, with Cello and Vern heading that up. So thanks so much for that, and Crane, your team as well. The HSRC people have been participating here as well. The contributors, the provocateurs, the sense makers, the panel members. It's been great, the audio-visual people, the caterers, in many, many different kinds of respects. And I'm not going to, we have had special attendees here. I'm not going to make that mistake to try and get to that particular kind of point. Just to say that my own team from Krishet, you know, you wouldn't believe how easy this was for me in just, you know, engaging with the kind of programmatic work that we have to do because other people are knocking other things together. I'm extremely grateful for that. Marisa heading up that space. That has been fantastic as well. So yeah, so from our side, the lunch is somewhere downstairs, Derni? This right inside? In the cabinet room, up downstairs, okay? Just to say from the university side, and just to affirm the VC's gratitude for this, thank you so much for coming and spending such a productive and intellectually stimulating time with us. We are grateful. Thank you so much.
I didn't want to be part of the Manel. That's the problem, because I'll be associated with them. And I was trying to avoid that. But thank you so much for this opportunity. I thought mine really is to express our gratitude. Gratitude to all of you for the kind of work that you put behind this. I cannot thank the ambassador enough. You know, whenever we partner with you, there's something special that comes out. So I want to thank you for that. The person who's representing our board, Prof. Hamilton, thank you very much for being here. Prof. Mutwa, please communicate our gratitude, and Prof. Sudin, thank you. But I have to also say that Prof. Sudin said something on Wednesday about wearing a T-shirt from 10 years earlier. There was no T-shirt this time, so one is disappointed by that. So if there is something to mark, it's that. And a badge. I mean, look at this. This is important. It's part of a mark, guys. So I think get it right next time. It will help. It will help us attend. You know, we don't attend just for just. Yeah, thank you. But you know, I was thinking again about this this time, that Mandela, and how it's about relevance of Madiba today and in future. That any project that we try and think about, they must impact the lives of those who are still to be born. They have to touch that student that I spoke about on Wednesday, who's being taught by my wife, but their child too, who will be coming to this university. But again, I reflect on what Melebo said about the bohloko ba seeta bo tsejwa ke monga sona. And one cannot actually translate that than to use what Muhammad Ali said in return. He said, it isn't the mountains ahead to climb that wear you out. It's the pebble in your shoe. And the pebble in our shoe is something that we have to work out. Our intellectual agenda that you were talking about earlier on, Siraj, that it's about doing differently. That pebble in our shoe is about ensuring that we walk away from the lazy sloganeering, where you sacrifice intellectual battles and you sloganeer to throw just a word and it's enough. You know, the hashtag movement, how they respond to things is word, and that's enough. That can't be enough, not in this environment. And to also think of that pebble as the child who thinks that violence is the answer. I sent a video to the VC late last night, 2 videos in fact, to the VC late last night, saying if this project is to do anything, is to ensure that we respond in a way that can help someone who takes bricks and just breaks windows of a school. I don't know if you saw that. And cops come and they continue to throw bricks at cops. And they injured this woman, the female cop. And then they got shot at. The trauma that we're going through every day is our woundedness. And that woundedness, in my view, is something that this project like this needs to be looking into. How do we deal with the depth of the soul of this country and deal with that woundedness? But that pebble also is about how do you fund these kind of projects so that they do something meaningful that can touch many lives beyond just the Eastern Cape. And I want to finish off by saying that whenever you think of Madiba, I like using what Bishop Mpumlwana called him the ancestor of hope. And this is in the spirit of what we're talking about, the spirits and the ancestors. That is the ancestor of hope. That we think of people like Mam Winnie as the ancestor of active citizenship. That may this project help us become those active citizens. That it helps us become those living ancestors of hope. Whoever looks at us and then can say, I want to also be part of it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Selo. Can I hand over the last word to our Chair of Council?
No, I think I can do it from here. I will stand up. Yeah. No, just to say thank you, really, first of all, I guess to Madiba himself for having been part of our lives. You know, he's been a gift. However way you see him, whether he's a revolutionary or whether he's the teddy bear, most of us in this room have experienced a part of him. And his legacy clearly is still alive in all of us, because otherwise we wouldn't be here talking about this. And I think for our nation to have had him, it says a lot about South Africa, actually, because all of us who certainly were alive when he was, before he became our president, while he was in prison, and we experienced that ourselves as part of this nation. Yeah, no, thank him. And today being International Women's Day, by the way, to also remember Masisulu and all the women in that same period, in that struggle, whose histories have to be told, as Kolola said also present us with an opportunity to look deeper into who we really are and what we have become. You know, South Africa is not just what it is today. I think we should also be careful about not looking at the last 11, 10 years and think that there was a lot that was achieved, as Joel said, in the early days. But we need to take responsibility and fix it. And it can be, I was saying that these things are not monolithic. So this is not just our project, I think, shared with HSRC and the Nelson Mandela Foundation. I think every single human being in this country can do something. And there are lots of examples of what people are actually doing. So early on this year, when we launched our digital platform, our storytelling platform, you know, there are stories that also epitomize Madiba's spirit that are happening in this country. And this is a particular project that is going to look at the issue around history and archives and around reframing the iconic italicized Madiba. But I think it can also be picked up from things that are already happening in our country that reflect that Madiba. So thank you very much, Professor Sudin, for HSRC being part of this. and Vern and Silo for the role that the foundation is playing, and Andre for who you are and what you've done and how you have made this into a project that actually is a huge possibility for us. It's a lot of work, it's a big project. It will require resources, and we're going to have to work very hard at getting the resources. But I think that we shouldn't be discouraged by the size of it, you know. It is big, yeah. It's going to be big, it's going to be difficult, but I think there's some seductiveness about that in itself. So, wish you all the best. Those of you who are leaving and going somewhere else, travel safely. Those of you who are staying, have a wonderful weekend. And tonight, have a glass of champagne to celebrate the women in your lives.